Something is not adding up in the XRP space right now, and if you're paying close attention, you can feel it. There's a growing gap between what people are saying online and what is actually happening in the real world. Many voices keep repeating the same message again and again that XRP already has full regulatory clarity, that everything is settled, and that no new laws are really needed. But when you step back and look at the bigger picture, that story starts to fall apart very quickly. Welcome to XRP Gold Silver Scope, where we focus on facts, not hype, and today we're going to break down what's really going on behind the scenes. Let's start with the core claim. A lot of content creators are pushing the idea that XRP is already in a perfect legal position, especially after the court decision in the United States. According to them, the fight is over, the uncertainty is gone, and adoption should already be happening at a massive scale. They also say that the Clarity Act is not important for XRP itself, and even if it doesn't pass, everything will continue as normal. That sounds comforting, but it doesn't match reality. If XRP truly had everything it needed right now, then we should already be seeing major American banks integrating it into their systems. Think about it logically. XRP is designed to reduce costs, speed up transactions, and eliminate the need for outdated systems like Nostro and Vostro accounts. For banks, that's a huge advantage. Faster settlements, lower costs, and more efficiency. In theory, they should be rushing toward it. But that's not what we're seeing. Since the legal battle wrapped up around August 2025, there has been no wave of adoption from major U.S. financial institutions. No major announcements, no large-scale integrations, no headlines showing American banks racing to implement XRP in their daily operations. And that's where the real question begins. Why? To answer that, we need to understand something very important. There is a difference between XRP having some level of legal clarity and institutions having complete clarity on how they can actually use it. This is where most people get confused. A court ruling may say that XRP is not a security in certain contexts, but that does not automatically give banks the green light to use it freely in all situations. Banks don't operate on assumptions. They operate on rules, clear rules, written rules, approved rules. Before they adopt any new technology, especially something involving money movement, they need full guidance from regulators. They need to know how it will be treated on their balance sheets. They need to understand the risk, the compliance requirements, and how regulators will view their actions. Right now, that complete playbook is missing. And that's exactly why the Clarity Act matters so much. It's not about XRP alone. It's about the entire system around it. It's about giving institutions a clear framework so they can move forward without fear. Because at the end of the day, banks are not afraid of technology. They are afraid of uncertainty. Now here's where things get even more interesting. When you look at the partnerships and announcements that have come out since the lawsuit ended, a clear pattern starts to appear. Yes, there have been deals. Yes, there has been progress. But almost all of it is happening outside the United States. You see activity in places like Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and Australia. You see collaborations, pilots, and integrations happening across global markets. But when it comes to American banks, the silence is loud. That tells you something very important. It's not that XRP is failing. It's not that the technology doesn't work. It's that the environment in the U.S. is still not ready for institutions to fully commit. And until that environment changes, adoption will remain limited in one of the biggest financial markets in the world. So when someone tells you that everything is already solved and nothing else is needed, you need to question that. Because the data, the partnerships, and the real-world behavior of institutions are telling a completely different story. And this is just the beginning. In the next part, we're going to go deeper into the actual deals, the global activity, and the hard data behind the XRP ledger itself to understand exactly what's happening under the surface. Now let's move beyond opinions and look directly at the evidence, because this is where the real story starts to unfold. When you analyze all the major announcements, partnerships, and updates that have come out since August 2025, a very clear pattern begins to emerge. At first glance, it might seem like Ripple is making huge progress everywhere. And to be fair, in many parts of the world, that is absolutely true. But when you narrow your focus specifically to the United States, the situation looks very different. Let's walk through this step by step. Some of the biggest names that appeared in recent announcements include global banks, payment networks, and financial institutions spread across multiple regions. You see involvement from Canada, Europe, Asia, and Australia. There are developments in places like Japan, Singapore, Germany, and the UAE. These are not small markets. These are major financial hubs, and Ripple is clearly expanding its footprint there. But here's the key detail that most people miss. None of these major developments represent full-scale XRP adoption by American banking giants. Yes, there have been collaborations involving US-based companies, but when you break them down, they often focus on things like custody, stablecoins, or experimental pilots. In some cases, XRP is not even the main component being used. Instead, other solutions are being tested while XRP remains in the background or completely absent. This is not what you would expect if the US market had complete clarity and confidence. Now let's take it one level deeper and look at the actual XRP ledger data. Because numbers don't lie, and they give us a much clearer picture than headlines ever could. When you track transaction activity over time, especially around the point when the lawsuit ended in August 2025, you would expect to see a strong upward trend if major institutions were stepping in. But that's not what shows up. Instead, the data remains relatively stable, with no explosive growth that would indicate large-scale institutional usage. The same pattern appears when you look at the total value being transferred across the network. There are occasional spikes, which is normal in any market, but nothing consistent or massive enough to suggest that big banks are actively using XRP for high-volume settlement. Then you move to active users and accounts. Here, you do see growth, especially around the time when ETFs and broader market exposure increased interest in XRP. That makes sense, because retail investors and smaller players are entering the space. But again, this is very different from institutional adoption. If major banks were truly integrating XRP into their operations, the scale of activity would look completely different. You would see sustained, massive increases across multiple metrics. Daily transactions would surge, value transfers would skyrocket, network usage would reflect heavy, consistent demand. But instead, what we're seeing is a network that is active, growing in parts, but not yet operating at the level you would expect if large financial institutions were fully involved. And then comes one of the most telling indicators of all, the burn rate. XRP has a small fee that gets burned with each transaction. When network activity increases significantly, this burn rate should also increase. But the data shows a relatively flat trend, which again suggests that large-scale usage is not happening yet. So when you connect all these dots together, the conclusion becomes very clear. XRP is not being held back by its technology. It is not being held back by a lack of interest globally. It is being held back by uncertainty in one of the most important markets, the United States. Banks are not ignoring XRP because they don't see its value. They are waiting for clear rules, waiting for a defined framework, waiting for regulators to provide a structure that removes risk from their perspective. Because for them, it's not just about whether XRP is a security or not. It's about how they can use it safely, legally, and at scale without facing future consequences. And until that clarity is fully established, hesitation will continue. Now let's bring everything together and talk about what this actually means going forward, because this is where things start to get serious for XRP holders. At this point, the situation is very clear. XRP has made huge progress globally, the technology is proven, and the use case is strong. But in the United States, the biggest financial market in the world, we are still stuck in a waiting phase. Not because XRP failed, not because institutions are not interested, but because the rules of the game are still incomplete. This is exactly where the Clarity Act comes into the picture. Right now, banks are sitting on the sidelines, not because they want to, but because they have to. These institutions manage billions, even trillions of dollars. They cannot afford to take risks based on assumptions or partial legal interpretations. They need a full framework that tells them exactly how to operate, what is allowed, what is not, and how regulators will treat their actions. Until that framework exists, hesitation is the only logical move. This is why the timeline mentioned by leadership becomes so important. If progress on regulation stalls, then the entire space, not just XRP, could remain in this slow-moving phase for much longer than people expect. And that means delayed adoption, delayed growth, and delayed real-world usage at scale. But on the flip side, if clear rules are introduced, everything can change very quickly. The moment institutions get that green light, you could see a completely different level of activity. Banks testing XRP privately could move into public deployment. Payment corridors could expand rapidly. Liquidity could increase. And the network metrics we talked about earlier, transactions, volume, active accounts, all of it could start rising in a way we haven't seen yet. This is why many believe that regulation is not a barrier, but actually the trigger. Think of it like this. Right now, XRP is like a high-performance engine sitting idle. The moment the road is cleared, it doesn't slowly accelerate, it takes off. And that road is regulation. There's also another layer to this that often gets ignored. Traditional financial institutions don't just adopt new systems randomly. They move in phases. First comes research, then private testing, then limited pilots, and only after that do you get full-scale integration. So even when clarity arrives, the shift may start quietly before it becomes visible to the public. That means the biggest moves could be happening behind closed doors before you ever see a headline. So what should you take away from all of this? First, don't confuse legal progress with full adoption. They are not the same thing. XRP may have made progress in court, but institutional usage depends on a much broader system of rules. Second, pay attention to real data, not just narratives. Partnerships, network activity, and actual usage tell a much clearer story than hype ever will. And finally, understand that timing matters. The difference between nothing is happening and everything is happening can come down to one key moment, when regulation finally aligns with innovation. If you've made it this far, then you already understand more than most people in this space. So make sure you stay informed, stay patient, and most importantly, stay realistic. If you want content that breaks things down like this without hype and without confusion, make sure you subscribe to XRP Gold Silver Scope. Hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion matters, and this community grows stronger when we focus on facts.